Hi, all. Welcome to episode 4 of Beyond the Breed. I'm calling this one the Guard Dog Paradox, and I'll explain that later. But essentially, it's going to be about guard dogs, not breeds, but about owning guard dogs. A couple of housekeeping things. One, I apologize for the bad quality of the video in the past. I realized I was uploading my videos much smaller than I meant to, so they were only like 480p, so I apologize for that. That said, I want to mention that this is meant to be a podcast. It's not really meant to be a video. However, I'm uploading the video of me talking during my podcast to YouTube because some people like to watch people talk. I am one of those people. I actually intake information better if I watch the person talking. So that's why I'm doing this. Um, so you can just listen to it. You don't have to watch it. There's not going to be any pizzazz or anything. You'll notice I'm inside. That's because we have a winter storm right now. I'm thinking that probably I'll be doing this inside from now on. This is kind of a random spot in my house to do it. Maybe I can find a better spot in the future. Also, the lighting isn't perfect, but I'll be fixing that when I get my new lighting soon. So please be patient. We will be deleting any negative comments. I want this podcast to be one of the few places where, especially on YouTube, where it's not just full of trolls and negative comments and stuff like that. I will answer questions as the best of my ability, depending on how many questions I get in the comments on YouTube. However, if it starts to get to where it's just a bunch of trolling and negativity, we'll just turn commenting off. So I'm asking all of you to be adults and make this like the one place on YouTube where we can have constructive conversation in the comments. Um, okay, this is my first opportunity to do redactions from my previous podcasts. I do these at the beginning of each podcast because sometimes I make mistakes. And in this case, I made kind of a dumb mistake. Two dumb mistakes. In the Nihon Ken podcast, I mentioned that the Shikoku is in a decline in Japan, and my data was out of date. My friend CJ pointed that out. Apparently, the Shikoku now is doing better in Japan, so that's really good news. Bad news is the Kishu Ken and the Hokkaido Ken are not doing as well. Their numbers have plummeted. The Kishu has really plummeted if you consider they were one of the more popular bred dogs in Japan for a little while. I mean, not including the Akita and Shiba, but the medium-sized ones. Um, so that's disappointing and troublesome. Hopefully, it's not a trend and it's just a blip in the chart of the Nihon Ken. And then the other thing that I got wrong, which was really silly, because I provided a link to the Hokkaido Ken Club, and if I had just looked at that link myself, I would have noted that there's way more breeders than just the one I listed. So I apologize to all the Hokkaido breeders out there. I should have done my homework better. I do want to say I am in my house, and so you will hear dogs downstairs barking. I have them crated while I'm doing this. Um, and so I apologize for any barking in the background, but that's kind of the way it is when you live in a zoo like we do. Um, Now an update about our stuff. For those that are just now joining, at the beginning of each of these episodes, I like to do a update about what we have going on here at Casa Anderson. First off, we have two Dogo females left. One is really feisty and adorable, and on the smaller side, my daughter calls her Sasha. I have no idea why. And the other is I believe it was Pumpy 4 or 5. She's a gorgeous female, just a really nice female. So she's available as well. I'm not trying to sell them on this, but I'm just letting people know. If you know of anyone looking for a dogo, we have two really nice ones. Also, Smokey's puppies are on the ground, and they're for a little over 4 weeks old now. They're adorable. They were sired by my West Siberian Leica Ike. That breeding is part of my secret personal project. And maybe I'll do an episode on that one day. but as I said, it's a secret. And then I have a rant. Well, not really a rant, but I have something to say. Recently, we got an email from a person who purchased a Kai Ken from us about 3 years ago. And they're clearly irritated with some health concerns that they have with that dog. And the health concerns are apparently he scratches himself a lot, and he scratches himself to the point of bleeding. He's lame at times. He has gunk coming out of his eyes. I mean, just sounds terrible. And as a breeder, it just makes you feel terrible. That's the last thing a breeder wants to produce is a health issue. We want every puppy to be perfect, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But here's the rant. I didn't hear about this until, about 3 years after that puppy left us. And if it came to the boiling over point that they're just now communicating with us, that's disappointing. So, what I'm asking all of you to do is communicate with your breeders. If you have problems with your puppies, tell them about it. It's important information. Luckily, we didn't repeat that breeding or even breed that female or male again. However, what if we had and we didn't know these problems existed? Your breeder's not going to want to hear these issues, but they're going to appreciate hearing them. And a good breeder will take action and take responsibility. But if you don't tell us, we don't know. So it's important to continue that communication with your breeder. Don't let it go 3 years until it's the boil over point that you're so frustrated that you're sending a slightly upset email to your breeder. Send it way before it gets to that point so that the breeder knows and so that you can have a conversation and there's a dialogue and maybe the breeder's heard of this issue before and knows what you can do to help. Like in this case, it kind of sounds like an allergy or maybe a tick-borne illness or maybe two. It's just a lot to unpack in the information we got, and we know nothing. So that's the end of my rant. Just we all want healthy dogs. Breeders want to produce healthy dogs, owners want to buy healthy dogs, and it's a two-way street. If breeders don't know that there are issues, then we're blind. And if owners know there are issues, it's your responsibility to tell the breeder as much as it is the breeder's responsibility to make sure that they're breeding the healthiest dogs they can. And so, you need to have a relationship with your breeder, and you need to talk to them. Okay, so that's enough of that rant. And I don't mean to pick on the individuals that sent me this email. Honestly, we really appreciate you sending this email. I just wish you would have sent it to us earlier. So moving on, I have notes because this is going to be a long one, guys. Actually, on that note, if you watched the last one, I said I wasn't drinking anymore because Jen put me on a diet, but I explicitly told her that I'm going to be drinking for this one because I'm going to need to because it's a long one. And I'm drinking a whiskey out of Austria. I've never had a whiskey out of Austria before. It's a 7-year. Okay, so anyways, enough with the alcohol. Moving on. I want to say ahead of time that I'm going to be talking about dogs biting people in this episode. I'm going to be talking about guardian dogs. And if that offends you or bothers you, you should just stop watching. I think that you need to make sure you listen to the whole episode, though, because I have some points, and I'm not just going to be talking about, dogs biting people the whole time. I have information that I think might change your mind about, potentially being offended by dogs biting people. Okay, so I'm calling this the guard dog paradox. And the reason I'm calling it the guard dog paradox is first let's start with one of the definitions of paradox. A person, thing, or situation that exhibits contradictory aspects. And I think that it perfectly sums up what most people expect out of a guard dog. So that's why I call it the guard dog paradox. The truth of the matter, and it's painful to swallow, and it's sad and unfortunate, but the truth of the matter is there's very, very, very few dogs that are produced out there that can be 100% trusted around non family members that still can be trusted to engage and protect their family from a threat. That's the paradox. People expect, or some of us expect guard dogs to be this animal that will know exactly when to engage and when not to engage. But the truth of the matter is, dogs can make mistakes. They have their own little brains. They use them to the best of their ability. And their idea of, you know, who who's your friend, who's your longtime family friend, might not be a friend to them. They might not have ever met that person before. So you can't expect to have a guard dog that's gonna know, like, oh, just because my owner introduces them appropriately, they're not going to bite him. That's just not the case. Another issue is many of us want a dog that will protect us from threats. You know, bite an intruder, engage a threat. But a lot of us are also unwilling to treat those dogs as the dangerous dogs that they are. Because the reality is, a dog that is willing to bite a person is a bite threat. And therefore, you need to manage that dog as if he could bite anyone outside your family. So, what that means is, when your longtime friend or your mom and dad come to visit, you need to lock your dog up. Your guard dog, who is your best buddy probably, who hangs out with the family and is a love bug all the time, probably sleeps on the couch and goes everywhere with you. Well, when you have guests over, you need to put him in a cage. You need to put him in a room where he can't get out and he can't harm your family, like your visiting family or your friends or whatever. Because what we as humans perceive as a threat may be different from what the dog perceives as a threat, or is different, honestly. Dogs' perception of the environment and what's happening is very different from the way humans perceive the environment, and it's just not worth the risk to put a family member that's visiting or a friend or even the plumber that comes in to fix your pipes. If you know these people are coming, you put that dog away because you don't want them to get bit. It's unrealistic to expect a dog to like every human they meet, and that's where a lot of people run into issues. They have a guardian. Maybe it's never bitten anyone, but they know it's protective and guards, and so they think that they can bring someone in and just introduce them to the person, or I'm sorry, introduce them to the dog, and and that dog will know, like, oh, okay, this is a friend. But that's not really the case. The dog has its own brain. It's going to assess the situation on its own. It's going to react differently. You know, if your friend jumps up during a football game, it's like, yeah, your dog might be like, attack, because he's never seen that behavior from that person or even from you or something. People do weird things. You can't expect a dog to have perfect judgment all the time. And if a dog doesn't have perfect judgment all the time, then you need to treat them like they could make a mistake. And that means putting them away when you have friends over. If they're truly a guard dog that will bite someone, it's important to do that. So let's move on. What is a guard dog? So for me, and it's important to understand that there's really no technical definition to this stuff. But for me, there's watchdogs, guard dogs, and personal protection dogs. I'm not going to talk about, or I don't group police dogs, military dogs, or protection sports dogs like Schutzhund dogs into that mix. They're, in my opinion, not guard dogs. A watchdog is simply an alert dog. They bark at a potential threat. Um, you know, most dogs will do this. Someone comes up to the house that they don't know, they'll bark. You know, a guard dog is a dog that also barks at a threat. They they might engage, but it's usually not their first instinct. They want the threat to go away by barking at it and giving a big display. They're usually more territorial and less Velcro dog than a personal protection dog. However, there can be some overlap. A personal protection dog, or PPD, is a sticky dog that stays with its person or its family most of the time, is expected to engage a threat, will guard the house if they're alone, but prefers to be with their owner. Military, police, and protection sport dogs are not guardians or personal protection dogs. No matter how much bite work training you put on a dog, if it does not have the instinct to guard and bite, then bite without a bite sleeve or cues, then it's not a guardian. In my opinion, there's 3 types of guardian dogs: livestock guardians, property guardians, and personal protection dogs. Livestock guardians are bluffing dogs. They will engage a threat, but it's the last thing they want to do. And you can apply simple logic to this to understand this point if you don't believe it. If a livestock guardians were originally meant to guard livestock, and at times they were meant to do so alone, without people around. Livestock guardians relied on bluffing, barking, and displays to scare off threats, and also marking territory and stuff like that. The last thing they want to do is engage because they're alone, and if they engage, they could get hurt. So from a rancher's perspective, a livestock guardian that engages every threat is useless because they will be injured more often than not and therefore not be able to do their job. And most ranchers don't want to own so many dogs that they can constantly replace this one livestock guardian that always wants to engage a predator and gets hurt. Even if that livestock guardian is really skilled at killing coyote or whatever, they still are going to walk away with injuries. And those injuries mean they can't work. And if they can't work, that means the livestock is at risk. And if the livestock is at risk, the livestock guardians aren't doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, they're not worth feeding in the eyes of the rancher. So we need to, as a collective in dogdom, stop pretending that livestock guardians are these awesome, engaging machines that make great personal protection dogs, because they do not. Another factor in that is that livestock guardians were never selected to take human physical pressure. They were selected to engage and scare off and maybe engage, animal threats, and maybe even scare off human threats. But the amount of physical pressure that comes from a fight with a human for a dog has to be selected for. And livestock guardians aren't. And this includes the Ovcharka. The Caucasian Ovcharka too, I'm sorry to say. There's thousands, if not millions, of videos online of people doing protection work with their livestock guardians. And if you know anything about protection work and you know how to read dogs, you should look at all of those and not be impressed. I've never seen an impressive one in person or in videos. And that's because that's not what they're meant to do. This is kind of turned into a rant, forgive me, but I really don't like it when people who own livestock guardians try to make those dogs seem like they're perfect for situations that they're not intended for, like biting people. 99.9% of the bites that you see from livestock guardians are not impressive bites. meaning they're on on a limb or a head bite or something like that. Now, granted, I mean, a bite's a bite, it works. Uh, but you have to remember when you're trying to use your dog in a manner that it's not intended for, you're probably causing a lot of stress on that dog and a lot of unfair stress. And if you watch those videos, you see a lot of stress in those dogs. A lot of high pitched barking, a lot of, you know, redirection, a lot of avoidance. Just not what you want to see in a dog that you're putting it through that type of work. Okay, and then the next one, property guardians. They're typically independent and human aggressive, kind of like a Caucasian Ovcharka. They're mostly bluffing dogs as well. They put on a real big show, look real scary, scare people off, and maybe if you get in, they might bite you, but you're probably not going to be hospitalized or killed from it. So in some cases, that might be what you want, but if we're talking about guardians and personal protection dogs, we have to understand that the perfect example of those are the dogs that give real committed, strong, solid bites in places that are considered high pressure, which would be like the stomach and the chest, maybe inner arm. We're not talking about a little arm bite or a nip or even a head bite, because what's important to understand is a dog views a person's head as an appendage, just like the arms and the legs. So this is the pressure point, right? The further they get from that in a bite, the least assertive and committed they were in that bite. So that's why most fear bites are at your fingers or your ankles and things like that, or your face. That's why so many dogs with fear aggression bite kids in the face, because people are stupid and they don't let their kids, they don't train their kids not to do stupid shit to their dogs. And they have a dog that has shitty nerves on top of that, and so the kid does something and they get bit in the face because it's a fear bite. It's a fear bite situation. Anyways, moving on to personal protection dogs. They're typically sticky, sometimes annoyingly sticky, like a Velcro dog. They don't want to leave your side. They are meant to engage. Their appearance and may be enough to scare people away, or should be enough to scare people away. They might bark or growl, but generally they're not bluffing dogs. They're not going to bark like an LGD would or a property guardian. They're just going to take action. Their job is to read human beings. That includes their owner and other humans. That's why socialization is so important for a personal protection dog, because they need to learn how to read people, in a positive, classical conditioning way. You're not going to, if a dog is truly a guarding dog and has civil aggression, you're not going to socialize it out of them. You're just going to improve their ability to read situations by socializing. And this applies to livestock guardians and property guardians as well. You should socialize your guard dog. It's really important. You should work to make positive associations for that dog and not put them in situations where they can build negative associations, so that then they can read people in situations better. And they're less willing to act fearfully or unsure or read a situation and not as well. All right, so other types of aggression that are important. I've already mentioned civil aggression. Civil aggression, for those that know, the simple way to describe this is basically a drive to bite people. This doesn't mean they're handler aggressive or aggressive towards their family. That should not be tolerated in a guard dog at all, in my opinion. But it does mean they don't mind giving a bite to, a bad guy. And that's what you want to look for in a proper guardian. A dog you can trust with your family. A dog that is flexible and understanding and forgivable towards your family members, but is also willing to, bite another person if needed. Then there's territorial aggression. Territorial aggression is kind of exactly what it sounds like. They guard their territory. They're not necessarily guarding a person or an object or whatever. They're just guarding their territory. This is a very common livestock guardian thing. Caucasian Ovcharka are like this. Next, there's resource guarding. Resource guarding is, when a dog growls over food or water or toy or high value item. I've heard people argue that personal protection dogs are basically resource guarding their person or their family because your person or the family is a resource. Not only do they provide resource like food and water, etc., shelter, but they're also a resource for love and affection. However, the difference there is a dog that's resource guarding an item will usually resource guard the item from, any other dog or any other person. And in the case of a personal protection dog, they're using their brain to, to react to the environment and then, react aggressively if there's a perceived threat. So their guarding is triggered by a perceived threat, not necessarily as stopping a person from stealing you or something like that. I hope that makes sense. Resource guarding is typically a fear-based behavior, in my opinion. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to bring it up in the context of a personal protection dog, because a personal protection dog you don't really want to think of as reacting fearfully when they're guarding you because of the whole fear bite, thing. But maybe the better word is defensively. I mean, a personal protection dog is perceiving the environment, looking for threats. If there is a threat, they act defensively, but sometimes that defensive action can be assertive. The other one is fear aggression, which I just mentioned. Fear aggression is, a dog gets pushed past the point of flight and cornered to the point where they feel like they have to act aggressively to get out of a moment. They're biting to make the bad thing go away. A lot of people's guard dogs out there are fear aggressive. I'd be willing to say most are fear aggressive. You may not think it, or they may not think it, because they see their dog barking and giving this what looks like a bold, assertive reaction to a perceived threat, where in reality that dog is just acting in such a way that they want that threat to go away. It's a self-preservation instinct, not necessarily a guarding instinct. Any dog will bite if pushed past that threshold. The ones that get pushed back past that threshold quickly are the dangerous ones and shouldn't be called guardians. However, I've met so many dogs that the owners claim are guardians when in reality they're just fear aggressive. So that's an important thing when you're looking at a guard dog or a personal protection dog. You need to remember, you need to look at it and say, like, this may be an impressive display, and this dog may be scary, but is it really just a fear reaction versus, an actual guardian reaction? All right, now let's move on to bite work versus guardian instincts. This is an old conversation and argument. It goes on all over the interwebs. But I feel like I feel like I should address it in this podcast. Just because your dog does really good at Schutzhund and bite work and protection sports does not mean they're a personal protection dog or a guardian dog. Guardian instinct is something a dog is born with. It's an instinct. Sure, you can build their confidence through bite work and things like that. But if they don't have that guardian instinct, you can't train that guardian instinct. So you can't, just because you see a dog doing stellar bite work, that does not mean that dog is a good personal protection dog. This includes police dogs and military dogs. Those dogs do amazing work, and they're very highly trained. Impressive animals, good nerves, all of that stuff. But they're not personal protection dogs. They work off of cues, and they're heavily trained. An example is a police dog pretty much knows it's gonna bite someone. It's gonna do their job before it's ever even seen what they're going to bite or the environment. And the reason for this is there's loads of cues that they're trained on, or even not trained on. The dog can associate cues. So an example, putting on a vest on your dog, or putting on a specific leash, or putting them in the dog box, or, even just the way you act. Like if you're a police officer, if you're acting a little bit more energetic, like you got called on something and you need to get there quickly, the dog's going to pick up of that. The dog knows, like, I'm probably going to be biting someone now, or I'm probably going to be sniffing this truck now because of all those cues, right? But a personal protection dog doesn't have those cues. They have to, and a guard dog, they have to look at, the environment as it's dynamically changing without any cues, and then decide if they need to act appropriately, engage a threat or whatever. That takes lots and lots of environmental training for that dog to understand those things. And it takes a really good decoy, a decoy that understands the difference between, a sporting dog and a protection dog. Bite work is useful, as I said, for building the confidence in a personal protection dog. So I'm not saying, like, don't do bite work with your personal protection dog or your guard dog. I wouldn't do it with a livestock guardian, because you shouldn't expect a livestock guardian to really be performing the role of a personal protection dog. But a personal protection dog is going to have to be able to fight a person if it comes down to it. And that requires you to, train them in such a way that builds their confidence in all kinds of environments, under all kinds of physical pressure, to still engage and maintain that bite. But having said that, the most important thing for a personal protection dog or a guard dog, any dog really, but when you're talking about high liability situations like this, the most important thing is obedience training. And that, in my opinion, is where Schutzhund and stuff like that is really valuable for a personal protection dog, because it puts some really solid obedient work on the dog. You need to be able to stop that dog. If it's out there, with you, and it thinks it sees a threat and it starts to react, you need to be able to say, down or whatever, to prevent it from escalating. Because, as I said before, dogs make mistakes. They're not perfect. They're not robots. And robots make mistakes too. You can have a guardian or a personal protection dog that will engage a threat without doing any personal protection work with them. But you definitely want to have obedience training on that dog. That said, if you don't test the dog, you never know if they have what it takes to bite. Now let's move on to the liability and the reality of owning a true guardian dog, a true civil aggressive guardian dog, a dog that will engage a human threat. I've already kind of touched on this, but let's start with just a simple statistic. 99% of break-ins are um, are stopped by just simply a barking dog. The bigger and the darker colored the barking dog is, the scarier it is, and so the less likely someone's going to break in. Pretty much that's what all anyone needs. And the reason I say that is because in America, at least, and depending on your local state laws and such, but if you have a guard dog and he engages an intruder, like a legit intruder that's there to rob you or whatever, that dog, when the cops show up, is probably going to be destroyed or taken from you. And in a case where a guard dog, you know, let's say, engages and eliminates, i.e., kills a threat, even if that threat came in with guns blazing and wanted to murder your whole family, that dog's going to be destroyed. And depending on the state you live in, you could be charged with that death, meaning you could end up with a manslaughter charge. So when you think about all that, do you really want to own a guard dog? You probably really just want a good big watchdog that'll, make a big stink, and put on a good show and scare 99% of the threats away. Because in reality, if someone really wants to kill your family, they're just gonna shoot your dog. And that's the sad reality. The liability is so high in America that only a select few, in my opinion, should be owning true civil aggressive guard dogs. And those few that own them, they have to treat them like a wild animal, essentially. They have to treat that dog like a dog that will bite anyone. So I know I can speak from experience because I've owned several. And, sometimes I'm like, what's the point of owning this guard dog if every time someone shows up, I have to put them away and lock them up? Kind of defeats the purpose, because what if that one person that comes over ends up being a threat? But, I'd rather not go to jail, so I do that. And more importantly, frankly, it's not just a selfish thing like I don't want to go to jail. I don't want people to be hurt. If someone's really trying to harm my family, sure, they can get hurt. But, someone that just shows up for whatever reason, if they don't mean any harm, I don't want them to be hurt. And so I put that dog away to, make sure they don't get hurt. So in most cases, I think, most people really just want a big, scary looking watchdog that's, probably not going to follow through with its display, but will at least scare off 99% of the threats. If you're a person or in a place where that 1% is scary enough to where you need a guard dog or a personal protection dog, a truly civil aggressive dog, seek out someone who is producing and testing and producing consistent results and solid nerve dogs. There is so many people out there producing guard dogs that even some of the ones that test them and work them pretty regularly are producing really unimpressive guardians with unstable nerves and anxiety and something you don't want. And then the average show breeder or pet breeder producing whatever guardian breed, if they're not, if they're doing basic temperament tests, that doesn't mean they know, they know that their dogs are going to bite or have solid nerves or whatever. So it's just really important that you seek out a solid breeder to purchase from, and don't just assume because the dog's breed X and it's a guardian breed that and this guy shows a picture of one barking behind a fence, that means it's going to be a badass dog and I'm going to buy one from them. Because that's 9 times out of 10 not the case. There's plenty of examples of people with dogs they think are, you know, truly confident and aggressive, barking behind a fence or whatever. And more often than not, you could probably open that gate and walk right in with the dog and he'd call in a second because they're putting on a nice display behind a fence. This, you see this all the time in livestock guardians, especially the Caucasian Ovcharka. All these videos of them acting aggressively behind a fence. Honestly, I posted videos like that of Luti, my Caucasian, acting that way because, you know, frankly, it is pretty badass. They put on quite the display. They're monsters, but I also know that that doesn't mean they're really going to engage a person. And, you know, if a dog, in my opinion, if you're going to own a dog that's going to bite a person, respect and manage that dog in such a way that you know that they can do that damage. And so you don't put them in positions where they can fail. And that means you put them away when people come over. You know, so maybe the only use that one of those dogs really has at that point is, you know, when you're out in your car and maybe someone opens the door to try and carjack you, your dog's going to make it happen. Or not going to make it happen, I should say. If you're asleep at night with your family and someone, you know, jiggles the back door and comes in, that dog's going to take care of business. You know, having said that, as I've said before, a big dog that barks will do the same thing, probably. I doubt anyone's going to break into your car if your big dog barks in their face, even if it's a love bug. And the same applies to the back door. So before you go out looking for a personal protection dog, a man eater is what I, you know, or an eater, a truly civil aggressive dog, you might want to consider, like, maybe that's not what I want. Maybe I really just want a real mean looking guard dog or watchdog, because that's probably going to be all I need. Okay, so I had a couple questions sent to me when I said I was going to do this podcast, and so I wanted to answer them. One is, when does a guard dog or guardian breed start to show guarding instinct? And I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. It depends on the individual dog. I've owned dogs that don't start guarding until they're 3 years old. And I've owned dogs that start guarding at 5. I've seen Caucasian Ovcharka puppies guard their pen at 5 weeks old, from previous litters we've had. Same with Central Asians. Having said that, that doesn't mean they're going to grow up and be amazing guard dogs. That's why temperament testing puppies and temperament testing young adults and temperament testing adults and continuing to temperament test and work your dog and test their abilities and their drives is important, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Another thing I want to say about testing is I get this opinion, I get this feeling that a lot of us in dogdom think that a dog from X breed is going to definitely behave this one way, or is going to excel at doing this one task. But the reality is the opposite. You can get a consistent phenotype from you know, a dog breed, a known dog breed. I mean, that's the point of dog breeds. However, just because it's a border collie doesn't mean it's going to be able to do, you know, herding trials and excel at them. Just because it's a bird dog doesn't mean it's going to excel at being a bird dog. There's a reason why there's hunting trials and tests and herding trials and tests and all these different... Schutzhund was designed as a test. There's a reason why those exist, because not every dog from that breed, you know, will make the cut. Frankly, very few dogs from those breeds make the cut. It's a pretty bad signal to noise ratio at the end of the day. There's more dogs that fail to perform in the function and the role that they were intended to than there are that excel at it. And so, with that said, you should be very skeptical of any person um, breeding a dog and saying it can do X, Y, and Z, um, but never showing results, and never showing the testing of their stock. And that's just the sad reality of dog breeds. I want to say it's the sad reality of dog breeds now, but I kind of think that it's probably been the sad reality of dog breeds since day one. I think back in the day when people were a little less attached to their dogs and probably culled a little harder, there was a little better signal to noise ratio, but I doubt they've ever been perfect. Another question I got is how to increase and decrease guarding instinct. I don't really know that you can increase or decrease an instinct. However, you can always make a dog's behavior happen more frequently by letting them uh, practice that behavior more. The kind of the rule is the more often a dog is allowed to express a behavior, the more often that dog will express that behavior. You can do something as simple as rewarding a dog for a sit. The more often you reward the dog for a sit, the more often that dog is going to sit. And so the same applies to guarding. The more often a dog is allowed to guard, or has the chance to guard, the more often they will guard. The more often the guarding behavior, which is a multitude of behaviors wrapped into one, will be expressed. And so, if you wanted to reduce your dog's how often they guard, you would need to every time they guard, redirect them and get them to associate that whatever the trigger is that gets them to do that behavior with something else. So ask them to do a another behavior that makes it so that they can't guard, like lay down or sit or look at me, that type of thing. If you wanted to increase it, then when they guard, praise them for it, and I think that's where protection work comes into play with a guardian breed. If you can, certainly a personal protection dog, if you can get them to express that behavior and reward them for them with a bite on a sleeve or bodysuit or whatever, the more often they're going to want to express that behavior. And but that also can make your dog, a little bit quicker to guard, which is, something that you have to think about. But again, we're talking about dangerous dogs anyway, so you should be treating the dogs like they're dangerous. With like a livestock guardian or a property guardian, I've seen things where a decoy will run up to the fence and the dog will put on a display and the decoy will run away. And that's rewarding to the dog because that's what they're trying to accomplish, is to get you to get the bad guy, the scary thing, to go away. So you can reward that behavior by simply having a decoy do that. But don't do that yourself. That's something I want to address, actually. Don't act suspicious to your own dog to get them to react in a guardian or aggressive way, because all you're doing at that point is just ruining your trust. I don't know if you can hear Kaiju whining in the background, but he is, so I apologize for that noise. He's my Shikoku Ken. He was just outside. I brought him in right before this. So I apologize about that noise. It's also distracting me a little bit, so I apologize about that. But anyways, where was I? Yeah, so don't be a decoy to your own dog. Okay? Your dog's smart enough to know it's you. They can smell you, they hear you, they can probably hear your heart rate and shit like that. Like they know it's you. You're not tricking them. And so creeping up behind your own dog and forcing them to act aggressive or guard towards you, or walking up to your fence and getting them to react, these are not recommended things to do, because frankly they just make your dog not trust you. Their dog's going to look at you like you're some sort of crazy person that acts aggressive every now and then. And so the last thing you want to do with a personal protection or guardian dog is get them to not trust you. Because, as I've said before, there's a liability in owning these dogs. So, yeah, guys, don't be decoying your own dogs. It's not a smart move, especially with a truly civil aggressive dog, because those fuckers will remember. And I know cases where, you know, people can't even be in the same room with a dog that they live with because, they acted as a decoy for that dog. Like maybe that dog left them and lived with someone else, and then they decoyed that dog, and then for whatever reason that person had to give up their dog, so it went back to the breeder, the same person that decoyed them, and now that dog wants to eat the breeder because it remembers. I don't think dogs are like super incredibly intelligent, but they're smart enough to know and remember that type of shit for sure. So, don't decoy your own dogs. All right, so I think that sums it up. I think the next topic was going to be on Kaiken, but I think I'm going to pass that because I'm kind of sick of talking about Nihon Ken right now. And I'm going to go on to multi-dog management. That's going to be the next topic. And at least for how we multi-dog manage. And I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you learned something. Feel free to ask me questions. You can reach me at bradanderson.org. Again, a reminder, don't be shitty in the comments. That's the rule. And thanks.